how do you see big data being used in healthcare in the future?
Yeah, I mean, in many different ways, and people vary a lot about what they think is what they consider to be big data. So in a lot of instances, people primarily think about it as data that's big in volume. But I think importantly for healthcare, it's not just about volume, but it's also about data that are um, complex. And so one of the things that comes up is what's kind of health services research, which can be using large volumes of well-structured data. And while that might be large, I don't consider it big data, or and people typically don't use data science methods to analyze the data. So what ends up being kind of big data in health is when you're really bringing in multiple data streams, some of which might be well structured, such as in the structured fields of the electronic health record or from surveys, but we also think about data that are more unstructured, and thinking about the kinds of things that people might be collecting through personally held devices, or could come in from smart homes that would have sensors in them and those kinds of things. So
So I was kind of thinking of big data as where if we feel like looked at a code and you could look at all the different labs and stuff. Is that how it is? So if you could say, of all of these people who had a respiratory related event, all of them had these similar characteristics based on these labs, or that like,
I would not call that big data or data science.
okay.
That's straight descriptive types of stuff. Anytime you're working with coded data, regardless of volume, that's been carefully curated and coded, for the most part, I don't think about that as being big data, because it doesn't meet the criteria of being complex or being data that has high velocity, such as data that you would get coming out of physiological monitors, or those kinds of things. And it's not that, and I'm not saying that those analyses are not important to do. Health services research is very important, but it's not data science. Big data we do in our research, like in our group at Columbia Nursing. One area tends to be around looking more at social media, and particularly we've done a lot of work in studying Twitter in the area of dementia caregiving, and that we look at both the content and structure of tweets. And this is like millions of tweets. For us, that's been very much focusing on information visualization. And so that's what we've declared as our area. And we do a lot of work in information visualization, both from communicating kind of complex information to individual patients, to doing visualizations of organizations or public health systems and those kinds of things.
Social media companies, that involves getting permission, and how difficult is that? How complicated?
It doesn't, for most social media companies, it doesn't require getting permission.
Oh, okay.
Most typically, so things that are in social media are not protected health information, so there's no PHI HIPAA aspect of it. And for the most part, when we click those terms of agreement, we agree that our data is public. And so that's absolutely true for Twitter. And so Twitter provides a daily, every day they provide a set of tweets that it's possible to retrieve for analysis.
Concerns about that in the context of vulnerable populations and what they're,
Yeah. And so, yes, I've written about that a number of times. So the paper that Nancy Ream and I have in the annual review of nursing research is about the role of it's about data science in symptom management, and that particular paper has a whole section that's focused on the ethics
Mhm.
on the ethics of big data. And when we get to so when we get to the issue that you raised and the vulnerable populations, it really is an issue of beneficence,
Mhm.
because you have people who are benefiting from your data and who are possibly monetizing it because of what they're doing for it, and they could be turning it into commercial value, and yet you, the data generator, aren't getting any of that benefit of it. Yeah. Do with getting SNOMED into the Unified Medical Language System, and also towards its work as an international standard. But I also ended up leading some work on behalf of the International Council of Nurses and the International Medical Informatics Association Nursing Informatics Working Group. And we did a project to do a international standard, ISO standard, focus on nursing concept representation. And so ISO standards don't have, and these were creating reference terminology models for both diagnoses and interventions. And while ISO standards don't necessarily have, some ISO standards don't have a huge policy impact in the US, but they have a huge policy impact in the European Union. If there's an ISO standard, they have to use it. And so that's the thing that we're doing now that is influencing some policy already and may have more policy implications down the road is, for the last, gosh, it's probably 6 years now, I've done work related on returning research results to patients who generated the data. And so when we first started this with our first project, we were doing a project called WISER, which included doing a community survey of almost 6,000 Latinos as part of the project. And one of the things I decided to do in that project was to figure out how to give data back to the community in a way that they could understand it and that it would be actionable for their self-management, as well as for use of the community to possibly do some community decision-making. And so we did participatory design to come up with some different types of designs for things that were, there's blood pressure, there's BMI, there's physical activity. A lot of it was around some symptoms, how their symptoms might compare to someone else, their overall health status and stuff. And then we created some software to create these visualizations at scale so you could give tailored results back to patients. And so that work has ended up, so that was kind of the work. And then what happened next with anyway, we're continuing that work with different types of populations and different types of visualizations. But one of the things that led to was me being appointed to a committee at the National Academy of Medicine that is, a committee is called, and these are consensus committees that used to be called IOM committees, and now they're called National Academy of Medicine committees. But anyway, the basic idea behind this particular committee, it is focused on returning individual laboratory results to patients, to research participants. Of course, you would return them to patients. but currently there's a lot of variation. There's conflicts in CMS and HIPAA. So anyway, this was a consensus study uh, funded by the All of Us Precision Medicine Initiative.
And so is the question, how do the research subjects interpret the results, or how do they use the results to better their health?
Yeah, for us, where as an informatics and somebody who's research in informatics and data science, particularly information visualizations, for us, it's how do we develop information visualizations that are comprehensible and actionable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was that kind of approach, and those are the same kinds of things that all of us is wanting to do. And for us, because we were primarily working with low SES Latino populations, often we're dealing with issues of limited health literacy and limited numeracy, and that's why we've gone with the information visualization
Mm-hmm.
approach rather than doing something that would be more purely text.
Right. Yeah, we were watching a video of you giving a talk at the National Institute of Nursing Research talking about infographics and...
Yeah, probably from one of the NINR big boot camps. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I've spoken there a few times. Yeah, people are still, I talk on that topic a lot. That's like my go-to talk at this point in my career. The one that everybody seems to want is
Mm-hmm.
kind of advancing nursing science and health equity in the era of big data and precision medicine. So it's a theme that's still meaningful as different schools of nursing are trying to figure out how they're gonna deal with this.
So what opportunities do you see for nursing researchers in informatics and technology? So what do you see for us in the future as researchers?
I mean that the opportunities are pretty much without boundaries.
What have been the biggest challenges in your career as a scientist?
Yeah, it's really been a very blessed career that has had many opportunities. So I think often the challenges are just making decisions around the choices,
Mm-hmm.
and of course it's always thinking about the time. Time management is challenging because of course there's lots of multitasking and that kind of thing. For me, funding, something like research funding has not been an issue for me. I have been very successful in being able to attract funding to support the program of research for the last 30 years, I guess, almost 30 years. So, and so it's not that it's and so I really can't say that it's been hard work, but when I think of there's other things that I would consider to be more challenging than something like that.
Great.
So there's all kinds of interesting things that can be done, and there's a number of nurses now who are doing different types of analyses in this field. And when I talk about it and its relevance to nursing, the suggestion that I actually make for schools of nursing is that they pick up, instead of trying to be broadly expert in data science, that they find an area to focus on and just develop excellence in a particular area.